Brucham Abo Hashem Hashem Egen Shirator would like to welcome entire chosson aveilim. Today the Shia is the Rabbi Yakov Smishlita on the topic standing for mitzvos. Today's Shia is Nichum, my grandmother Tzirul Bas Tzvialozo. The yahrzeit is today. Rabbi Yakov Smishlita.
Once again, we're amazed by the Aruka Me'eretz Mida, the greatkeit of Torah, the tremendous wealth of our Torah. We see. I started with a simple shayla, a few simple shaylas, and it turned into a beautiful sugya with a Mishnah, a Bavli, a Yishalmi. I start with a question. You go to a chosson and you see that when the chosson and kallah walk in, some people stand up, a lot of people stand up, and some people remain seated. It's not they forget to stand. It seems like they have a kapeda not to stand when the chosson and kallah walks in. And I wanted to know what is the explanation to this. Then we had a shayla, I guess the other side of the spectrum, le'aleinu by Nichum aveilim. People are sitting and then they stand up and they say Hamakim Menachem Eschem standing, as if it is some kind of kapeda dafka to stand. And I want to know, is that taka true? I was once by a bris and someone told me, you see, people are sitting by the bris, it's wrong, you're supposed to stand by a bris. No, is that true? And then it was actually almost 2 years ago, I still remember it, by the levaya of Rabbi Levaya. So it was a very, made a tremendous impression when they brought the nifter into the levaya. The entire aveilim stood up. And then, again, it made a very deep impression. And I was wondering, is that a halacha? Is there a chiyuv to stand up for a person that's no longer alive? And as we'll see, all of this is actually part of our sugya, which goes from Arachayim, Yeredeya, and Ebenezer. Standing for mitzvos, when and how is it a chiyuv? So one thing I want to mention, the concept of standing is not a kleinikite. Stand or sit, big deal. It's not true. We learn in the beginning of the Navi Shaiftim, Perek Gimel Pasuk Chaf, the Pasuk says, Devar alikim li, when Eglon Melech Moav was told the Dvar Hashem, Vayakam al Akisa, he stood up. He heard the Dvar Hashem and he stood up. So Rashi and other Rishonim quote a Chazal that happens to be the Makaras and Medrash Tanchuma and Vayechi Ois Yud Ches. Because he stood up for the Dvar Hashem, he was zayich to have a child, Rus Hamayavia, who's either his daughter or his granddaughter, who became the greatest mama of David and Shlomo. Imagine, a goyish the king. He was a guy. He stood up for the Dvar Hashem and he was zaycha to a daughter like Rus. But it's more than, of course, the Medrash, in fact, in Rus Bey's test adds, because he stood up off his kisei, he was zaycha to an enical Shlomo, that Vayashav Shlomo al kisei Hashem. He was the paisik. So, we talk about yichus and nachas, having nachas from children. Eglon Melech Moav was a goyish king, and look at the nachas he had from showing a kavod for the Dvar Hashem. Daf Yomi not long ago learned the end of Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Vav. Nebuchadnezzar took 3 steps, or 3 or 4 steps, to show kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he was quote zaycha to what he was zaycha to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Because he showed kavod, he took a step for Kvod Shamayim. But what really seems to open a new chapter into our sugya is a Mishnah in Bikurim. Now, this is the beauty of the sugya. It starts with a Mishnah and a Gemara, and it develops into a very, very detailed sugya. A little background we should know: the Mishnah and the Perek Gimel and Bikurim speaks about when Yidden brought Bikurim. The tremendous parade, the fanfare that went on. There was music playing, and the Kehanim, the levaya went out, and everybody went out to greet the Maviyei Bikurim. They were bringing their Bikurim, their first crop, and the whole Yushalayim made a parade to welcome these Maviyei Bikurim. Says the Mishnah in Perek Gimel, Mishnah Gimel, Kol Balei Umniyos Shebu Yushalayim Oimdim Lefneim. All the workers stood up, stopped working, and stood up to show respect for these Maviyei Bikurim. Now, it must have been an awesome sight, as the Mishnah calls them, the Sagane Kehanim, the Levayim, the Bachas, all these different Gedolei Yisrael, and even the workers that were busy working stopped to show kavod for the Mavia Bikurim. Now, if you have a sensitive halacha ear, you pick up on something. We know there's a mitzvah deraisa to stand up for a Talmud Chacham. They say if a talking, we stand up for a Talmud Chacham. The Gemara in Kedushin, Daf Lamed Gimel, learns it from a pasuk that the only chiyuv to stand for a Talmud Chacham is only a kima she'ein ba chasaron kis. If there's no loss of money, you stand up for a Talmud Chacham. If someone is working for someone else, and by standing up he's going to have to stop working for that small amount of time, the Gemara says, Ein Rishoi, he's not allowed to stand up for a Talmud Chacham when there's bittul malacha. And Taisus asks, Ein Rishoi, you're not allowed to? And what's wrong if you do? It's an aveira to stand up? Taisus says, yes. If you're standing up and you're wasting time from work, that's an issa. You know, it's another reminder of the tremendous importance of Chayshad Mishpat. It's a mitzvah deraisa to stand up for Talmud Chacham. But if you're working for someone else, now your obligation is nasasa v'nasata b'emuna. Be an erlich worker. Standing up takes a few seconds. It's only a few seconds, but a few seconds is a few seconds. So it's wrong. Ein rishai to stand up for Talmud Chacham when a person is working. As I state in the Gemara Kedushin. Frag the Gemara, so I don't understand. The Gemara quotes our Mishnah in Bikurim that Balei Umniyai stand up for Mevia Bikurim. Fragmar, how could that be? When a person's working, he doesn't stand up for Talmud Chacham, even though it's a mitzvah deraisa. And now when the Bikurim come, which is not a deraisa, you stand up even though you're working? How could that be? And for the Gemara, you're right. Look how precious it is when someone's doing a mitzvah. You're right. You don't stand up for Talmud Chacham because of bittul malacha, but for a person that's doing a mitzvah, that transcends that, and you stand up even during the work. And Bemis Rashi, the Gemara in Chul Nafnan Dalet has the same sugya, and Rashi adds, Tzrichen anu l'chababa. We have to magnify, we have to accentuate the greatness of a mitzvah, and therefore, even though it involves bittul malacha, you stand up for Mevia Bikur. You'll say, but what do you mean? This is a Pashat, a farmer. He probably came with his overalls and his races. Why do you stand up for him? It's not for him. It's for the mitzvah. In fact, the Gemara then says, maybe it's not such a raya. V'dil neshani hasam the imkenata machshil masad lavoi. And Rashi explains, maybe there's no chiyuv to respect oisa mitzvah. But why do you stand up for Bikurim? So Rashi explains, otherwise he thinks, who am I? You know, you have to think about the mitzvah Bikurim. There was a tremendous parade in Yerushalayim. What was this farmer bringing? How many bushels, how many sacks of fruit was he bringing? Not one. He was bringing, like the Mishnah says, Te'ena shebikra, Rimain shebikra, one fruit. Bikurim is one fruit. He was bringing one fruit, and he must have felt he's schlepping from the other side of the world, perhaps. He must have felt so unimportant. What's he doing? So if you don't show him kavod, he won't come next time. Rashi says, if he doesn't feel important, machshil noslav, he's not going to come next time. So maybe taka, there's no chiyuv for a mitzvah. It's only machshil noslav lavoi. But as we'll see, this is only a dilma. It's only a dichli. Lamaisa, our Gemara is a makar to stand up for an Isa mitzvah. The Yerushalmi has the same halacha, and the Yerushalmi also says, Ba yurei kam gedoyle koicha shel Isa mitzvah. Doesn't say mitzvah, Isa mitzvah. We'll soon pick up on that. You don't stand up for Talmud Chacham during your work. Isa mitzvah oimdim. Look at the unbelievable chiyuv. Standing up for an Isa mitzvah is more than a Talmud Chacham. Okay. Granted, the Yerushalmi does, this is also in Gimel and Bikurim, does suggest maybe Shan Yehocha Shehi Achas Lekitzim. Maybe it's not every mitzvah you stand up for, but it's a mitzvah that comes infrequently. Like Bikurim is once a year. Maybe that's why you stand up. Or other rare mitzvahs we'll soon see, maybe a chosson, a bris, which is not every day for all people. But we definitely see this concept of standing up for a mitzvah. But what's really striking, which put things in perspective, the Yerushalmi then adds, Ilan de kaimen in kaimei misa, those that stand up for a mace by a levaya. This is mamish ma'ashayla. You stand up for a mace, loimin kaimei misa in kaimei. We're not standing up for the Talmud Chacham, the mace. Ela min kaimei ilan de gamlin lechesed. Zok te pnei Moshe. We're not standing up for the mace who's a Talmud Chacham. Because even if he's not a Talmud Chacham, you stand up for those that are being malava the mace, the Chevra Kadisha that are bringing the mace into the levaya, they are an Isaac b'mitzvah. So the Yerushalmi gives a striking example of kavod for Isay mitzvah. It's not the mace, it's the ones that are doing the mitzvah of levayas ha-mace. So our shaila is a beferish Yerushalmi. Even if the mace is not a Talmud Chacham, you stand up for the Isay mitzvah. And that's why we'll see the Rishonim, for example, the Rav on that Mishnah, according to most, was a Rishon. The Rav says, therefore you stand up for the people that bring the mace into a levaya, and for the kvata by a bris. We'll soon see about that. The Sefer Chassidim was definitely a Rishon, Huda Chassid, in Tavkov Pei. Even an Amoritz that carries the mace or does a mitzvah, we stand up for him like we learned by Bikurim. V'chein im Amoritz oisik b'mitzvah, yamoid kenegdoi. We'll soon see the Taz in Simon Shin Samach Aleph, Sivkot and Beis also says it's a klal for all mitzvahs. Lav dafka, a mitzvah that's at risk, like machshil nasid lavai, but every mitzvah that a person does is a chiyuv to stand up for him. Why? It's not the person, it's the mitzvah. You know, it reminds me of a Gemara in Kedusha Laman Aleph Mabeis, Rabbi Yosef, Gavishama Kalkara De'ime, when he heard his mother's footsteps, he would stand up and he would say, Eikum Mikame Shchina Da'asya. He stood up for his mother, but the way he described it is very moving. I'm standing up for the Shchina. Now, I imagine Rabbi Yosef's mother did not learn like our daughters learned, she didn't know, she wasn't a Baki in Chumash and Rishonim. Yiddish Mama. But Rabbi Yosef had the eyes to see in his mother a shtik Shchina. The Gemara says, if you respect your parents, like respecting the Shechina. So he saw his mother and he saw a Shechina. This is the attitude when you see a mitzvah. Forget about who does it. It could be an Amoritz. But he's doing a mitzvah of the Rabbi Shalom. And that's why we stand up, we see the shtik Shechina in a mitzvah. That's why it's pashit that even though the Mishnah says this chiyuv regarding Bikurim, and today we don't have Bikurim, but basically this is a mitzvah for dairis. I just saw the other day the Marik in the end of in a tshuva in Shoirish Test. He has a whole scandal over there, very interesting story. There was a certain kehillah that had a minig that Shabbos Bereshis they did not give the kohen aliyah. They gave it to the one that would donate money, shemel ma'ar, that would light up the shul for the whole year. He gave enough oil that there would be lighting for the whole year. It was a gewaldige kavod to get the aliyah. So, if you pay the money, you got kohen. And the kohen, of course, was moichel. One year, kohen was defiant. I'm not going to be moichel. I'm going to come to shul. I want my aliyah. So they told him, basically, don't come. We're not going to give you the aliyah. And it says there they had the police stand outside and not let him come into shul. So it was pretty, scandalous. So they wrote to the Marik, and the kohen was all upset. There's the kiddush, it's a deraisa. So the Marik says, listen, Lamaisa, showing kavod like this to mitzvahs, that you sell imagine that you sell the schus to pay money, electricity for the whole year in shul. You're fighting for the schus, is kavod a mitzvah. And we find the Mishnah in Bikurim that they showed gewaldige kavod for a mitzvah, more than to Talmud Chacham. That a person that was working stood up for the farmer. So we see that it's even bigger than Kvay Talmid Chachamim. And then he adds, which is to me was the punchline, he says, "In bayamim rishayim, the times of the Mishnah, shayukum alachim, they were great people, chashashu kadesh lachshim lasad lavai, and therefore higdilu kvaydam yais mikvay tamad chacham, kolshkein bekolshkein bizman hazeh she'anu kechamoyrim." Pardon me, but he's talking in his times. And then he says, but not like Rav Pinchas ben Yair's chamor. It's not bad to be a chamor, Rav Pinchas ben Yair, but not like that. Yesh lachash le'achshin lasad lavai, and therefore we have to show kavod. So he puts things in perspective. It's a question of kavod ha-mitzvahs that is applicable at all times. Now, lamaisa, this is definitely a chiyuv to stand up for an oiseh mitzvah based, as we said, on a Mishnah, and we'll soon see, as we saw already, the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, all record this chiyuv. If you ask, what's the reason for the chiyuv? Simply put, it's because of the chavivus of a mitzvah. We also saw sometimes there's a concern, machshil lasad lavai. And if we could add, I think the words of the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Aleph, Perik Vav, is very appropriate. He's talking not about our Mishnah, he's talking about the effect that a mitzvah has. He paints a picture of what a person looks like when he does a mitzvah. And just the words are uplifting. You would say the brach asher kitshanu b'mitzvayso, v'kidashtan b'mitzvaysecha, ki mi'eis she'oila al rayan ha'adam laseis mitzvah, takev nasa rishumay lamaisa, umamshich al atzmoy, or makav v'kedusha al yoyna, chayfefes olav v'sayvavasay oisay. A person becomes enveloped, surrounded by a kedusha that's awesome. And he says that's shad v'skadishtem v'yisem kedoshim. He brings a zoya that it's ruach kedusha is shayra on the person, and through this kedusha or makif, he zoycha v'atem adveikim b'shem alekechem chayim kulchem ayoyim. And that's shad v'chaybem. He's mesubah b'kedushas ha-mitzvah, and he's mukaf from this or of Gan Eden. Person does a mitzvah, we don't see it, we don't have the eyes to see it, but he's surrounded and he's overtaken with a tremendous kedusha. Nope. Such a person, you stand up for. And the Gemara says in Kedushin, the Flamed Gimel Amid Beis, for a Baal Maisim, a person that does a good deeds, you have to stand up for. So I guess the point is we have to stand up for an oiseh mitzvah. And I saw in a wonderful Sefer Yisrael by my mother, he has a big inyanim of standing for all mitzvahs, and in Perik Mem Beis he brings an Aderes. I don't have the Aderes, but the Aderes is in the Sefer Elu Yamdu Simin Mem Beis. The Aderes says the reason why you stand up for an oiseh mitzvah is because of the kedusha of an oiseh mitzvah. He might be an Amoritz, but right now he's doing a mitzvah, a kleinigkeit, a mitzvah. Therefore he deserves respect. I'll say, so I'll also do a mitzvah. I'll become so chashiv? The answer is Adarabba. Be my guest. Why not? A person does a mitzvah, he becomes enveloped with this armak, with this v'skadishtem v'yisem kedosh. To apply this lemaisa, I think, hopefully by now, should be simple. First of all, as we saw, even when someone's working, and there's bittul malacha for someone else, you have to stand up. How about if someone is learning, and a oiseh mitzvah walks in? So the chayr, we can make a simple cheshbon. When someone is learning and a Talmud Chacham walks in, does he have to stop learning to respect Talmud Chacham? It's my first Shulchan Aruch, he does. Even though Talmud Torah can make a kulam, but you have to do mitzvahs. So we'll make a cheshbon. Madach, you stand up for Talmud Chacham during learning. Kolshken, you stand up for an oiseh mitzvah. Because as we saw from the Mishnah, Gemara, Bavli, and Yerushalmi, there's more of a chiyuv for a oiseh mitzvah than a Talmud Chacham. And I believe that's why the Mishnah Rishayna, it's one of the Mefarshim on the Mishnah Bikurim, Mashma, he doesn't say why, but I think that's what he means. I feel Talmud Chacham tzrichim lamoid b'shasha oiskim b'toira b'shem chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. So this chiyuv of standing up for an oiseh mitzvah is even during work and even during learning. The question which I would like to try to clarify is, let's say the oiseh mitzvah says, you're standing up for me, come on, little old me, no, I'm moichel. Can an oiseh mitzvah be moichel on this kavod? So if you think like a Baal Halacha should think, well, mechila for standing, it's not a new concept. Of shemachal al kvoidei, kvoidei machal. Talmud Chacham shemachal al kvoidei, kvoidei machal. So why can it be that oise mitzvah shemoichel al kvoide machel? But I hope you realize it's not so pashut. Because let's think for a moment. The chiyuv standing for a oise mitzvah, is it for the oise mitzvah? Or maybe it's for the mitzvah? If it's for the oise mitzvah, so he could be moichel, it's his covet. But if it's standing for the mitzvah, it's not his covet. And re'ez pella, if you look at the lashon of the Bavli, more kedushin, kama chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. The stress is mitzvah. The Yerushalmi's lashon is kama gedoyla koichon shel oisei mitzvah. Oisei mitzvah is the person that does it. In fact, the Yerushalmi concludes, you stand up when they bring in the mace, not for the mace, but for the gamlim leichesed, for the ones that are doing the mitzvah. So it seems that the question of standing up for a mitzvah, is it for the mitzvah or the oisei mitzvah? Maybe is machlokes Bavli Yerushalmi. But its truth is, it's not mistavra, because as we said, the whole point is to be mechabev oisei mitzvah. And even Amoretz, you have to stand up for. So I think it's pretty logical to say, and I saw the makna on our Gemara in Kedushin said Beferish, that even though of shemachal al kvoida is kvoide machal, but the oisei mitzvah cannot be machal on his covet, because it's not his mitzvah, it's not his covet, it's the covet of a mitzvah. Now consider the next question that I think is very enlightening. Let's say you're in shul and someone walks in with his talis and tefillin, he's going to put on talis and tefillin and go daven. Do you have to stand up for him? Doesn't seem sensible. I mean, you stand up for every single year that comes to shul. But then again, he's going to do 2 mitzvahs, 3 mitzvahs, talis, tefillin, and davening. Someone comes into shul with dala minim, we stand up for him? Why not? So the emphasis, according to the Yerushalmi, it's pretty pashut. Because the Yerushalmi says, when is there a chiyuv to stand up? Shehi achas lekitzim. That was the lashon Yerushalmi we mentioned earlier. A mitzvah that's infrequent, you stand up for him. But let's say it's a daily mitzvah, talis and tefillin, krishma, maybe there's no chiyuv, which would explain why we don't stand up for every oiseh mitzvah. So based on the Yerushalmi, we have a limat chus, we don't stand up for every other yid. And what's really interesting, the Behuda in the Tshuva in Arachayim Kam Siman Chav Zayin has a totally different shayla. He has a shayla on Einan that's Leilenu and Einan Me'eis Le'eis. What does he do about the mitzvah of Sfira? He won't count Sfira a whole day, he loses the mitzvah. And Yehuda has a chiddush which he doesn't really accept, but he has a suggestion. Maybe a mitzvah that's b'shaita, a rare mitzvah, there's no p'tur of Einan. And he says, Varaya, the Gemara in Kedushin says that you have to stand up for an oisei mitzvah. Do we stand up for every year that's going to daven and say Krishma? He's going to do a mitzvah. So Aktanai to Behuda, and listen to his chiddush. Maybe the only chiyuv is chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, which means a infrequent mitzvah. Then you stand up, like Bikurim, like levaya sameis. We'll soon see kvata, maybe going chosson and kallah. But a mitzvah like of every day, when he's going to say Krishma, and we can of course assume tefillin, talis, a daily mitzvah, there's no chiyuv. So we have a Yerushalmi, and we have a Noid Yehuda, who's mechaber to this Yisayid. Plus we could add, the Bavli has the Dilma, Shani Hastam, the Imken Ata Machshil Mastad Lava. The Bavli had a suggestion, maybe the only chiyuv is, if you don't do it, like by Bikurim, he'll think he's a nobody, and he won't come next year. So maybe the only chiyuv standing up for a Isa mitzvah is a mitzvah that's at risk. That if you don't stand up for him, he's going to feel so unimportant that he won't come. The only question is this halacha l'maisa? The Gemara's lashon is v'dilma shani hasam de'im kenat machshil lasad lava. How do you learn a Gemara in Kedusha? We all learned the Gemara. V'dilma, maybe yes or no, make up your mind. If it's a maskana, then the chiyuv of standing is very limited. If it's just a dichoy, not lalacha, then maybe we could still say it applies to all mitzvahs. So I looked into this, the Marit, one of the G'dailei Mefarshim on the Gemara in Kedushin, a dichoy loy samchina. It's only a dichoy, but it's not lamaskana. Then he says, bigger chiddush, even if taka, it's true, only a mitzvah at risk. That means that when is there a chiyuv to stand up, even though there's bittul malacha, a mitzvah at risk. But let's say there's no bittul malacha, then even a mitzvah is not at risk. Every mitzvah across the board, you have to stand up. So here we see that l'maisa it's true. Every mitzvah that a person does, you have to stand up. Talis and tefillin. What about talis and tefillin? So we'll say the first pshat that we said, only an infrequent mitzvah. Now, every sugya is only complete if you have a Geshmaka Rambam. Well, this sugya has a Geshmaka Rambam. The Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, on that Mishnah in Bikurim, the Rambam, in a few words, Kedarkai, seems to change the whole pshat, the whole direction of the Mishnah. The Rambam says the Balei Umniyos have to stand up for the maybe a Bikurim, Lefisha Nechnosim Heim Kahal Ukavad Atziba Shani. You have to stand up for the maybe Bikurim because it was done with great fanfare, with a lot of attention, and now it's a question of Kvoid Atzibur. And Kvoid Atzibur Shani, the Rambam seems to say the only chiyuv standing for an oiseh mitzvah is if there's a tzibur that's doing it. And the Marsha, on that, our Gemara in Kedushin elaborates, since, as the Gemara says, Apochais, Vasagonim, the Kihanim, the Leviyim, the Baliyum Niyos, they came with Chalil, they were playing music. It was such a fanfare, there was such a roivam, that's why you have to stand up. But otherwise, if it's a yachad doing a mitzvah, Zak the Marsha, on explaining the Rambam, there's no chiyuv to stand up. Now, according to this Rambam, I understand. A person walks into shul, Talis and Tefillin, Krishma, Dalad Minim, the works. There's no chiyuv to stand up. But the emes is, it's very hard to accept, and I saw the Mishnah Rishayna quotes the Rambam and says, but how could this be? The Mishnah, the Gemara explains, Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Nothing to do with Roivam. The Marit quotes the Rambam and says, but the Gemara's lashon is Bayu Rei Kama Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita. The Shalmi also says Noisei Hameis, who said it was done B'Rabim. The Rav that we mentioned, the Taz that we mentioned. I saw Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his Derech Hamuna on the Rambam Bikurim Dal Yezayin says the Rambam was the Rambam. But the Sefer Chassidim, the Rav, the Taz, the Pesachei Tshuva, all seem to say it's even if there's no tzibur, there's a chiyuv to stand. Now, Lamaisa, the Rambam bleibt the Rambam. Reb Chaim has a very nice shot on the Rambam, Chaim Kanievsky that is. But at the end of the day, we could say the following. It seems, lahalacha, there's a chiyuv to stand when a person goes to do a mitzvah. No, there's a tzad to say maybe only an infrequent mitzvah, maybe only machshil and lasad lavai, maybe only the Rambam, that when there's a rabbim, but as we'll see, and now we'll apply it more lamaisa, it seems there's a chiyuv to stand for someone that does a mitzvah within reason, as we're going to explain. To apply this a little more lamaisa, let's go in order of the Shulchan Aruch. First and foremost, I must tell you which reason I gave many times a day, the Darkei Moshe in Nun Vav Hey, the Ramah in Archaim, he says, I found in a Mordechai, quoting Yerushalmi, when you hear Davash of Kedusha being said, you have to stand up. How do I know? A pasuk in Shoftim Perek Gimel. Since Egloin Melech Moyev said, Dvar Hashem Elai, and he stood up, so when you hear a Davash of Kedusha, which means Kaddish, Baruch Hu, Aliyas, we'll soon see the Birchas Aliyas, you have to stand up. As I state in Darkei Moshe, and the Ramah in Nun Vav Aleph records the Halacha L'Maisa. And that's Taka the Minig of Ashkenazim. We stand up for Davash Kedusha, because our Sashatz, Baruch Hu, Kaddish, Kedusha. Okay, Svardim, you should know, B'derech Klal, show covered by sitting. Svardim sit by Kaddish, by laning, Zar Sashatz, Dafko, and they put on Tefillin. So, but I said the Ramah, the Ashkenazim, usually show covered by standing. Why? Mamish our sugya, our pasuk in Shoftim. I'll give you another application, which to me was a chiddush, because we once learned the sugya, and at the time I had not seen this, but it was very enlightening. We learned, just about, I think it was 2 years ago, we learned the sugya, which is a whole siman in Archaim Kuf Beis, Gemara in Brachis, you're not allowed to sit within Dalar Amis of someone that's davening Shemayin Esrei. So the question that we struggle then is why not? And also, if you're not allowed to sit next to someone davening, so when someone's saying Krishma, Yizicha shouldn't be able to sit. Don't forget, Krishma is a deraisa, and Shemayin Esrei maybe it's not a deraisa. So why Shemayin Esrei not, and Krishma yes? So we spoke about it then. It's Kvoid of the Shechina, Shemayin Esrei. So the Teras Chayim, I saw this recently, that's the son of the Machne Chayim, in Siman Kuf Beis Yivkot and Ches, Lani is Daiti Dov Chadash, but I think this is the Pshat. Since the person that's saying Shemayin Esrei is doing a mitzvah, you have to stand up for the Oisei mitzvah. So if he's davening, you have to stand up. Then he says, Oy Bazoi, I understand why Krishma not. Because if the person is doing a mitzvah that he's sitting, so you don't have to stand up, you don't have to be more than him. So Krishma that he's sitting, you can stay seated. But when it comes to Shemayin Esrei that he's standing, you have to stand also. Yeah. Then he says, therefore I can understand another halacha. The halacha is, let's say I'm learning in shul, and someone comes and starts davening Shemayin Esrei next to me. I was there first, I could stay seated. If I'm on the side, I could stay seated. Why? He's davening Shemayin Esrei. The teretz is, the whole thing, the chiyuv standing is because standing up for an oisei mitzvah. No. When a person is learning, there's no chiyuv to stand for an oisei mitzvah. So if there's no chiyuv to stand for an oisei mitzvah, you're allowed to continue learning and not stand up for the person that's davening. Now this was a chiddush to me. Because we saw the Mishnah Rishayna says beferish that you have to stand for an oisei mitzvah even during learning. Now, maybe he means to say that you have to stand the whole time. But Hamai is interesting how in Hilchais Tefillah it's our sugya. But we haven't seen anything yet. Listen to this. Duchening, Kehanim know this, that there's a chiyuv. Pashtus is based on a Gemara. It's really a Mechabin Kuf Chav Ches Yudalit based on a Kamara Posik that a Kohen has to stand when he duchens. In fact, Mr. Bruins, Yivkot and Aleph quotes much earlier sources. If Leilena the Kohen cannot stand, he's a wheelchair bound, can't stand, he can't duchen. Standing is very integral to the mitzvah of duchen. The question is, fine, the Kohanim have to stand. How about us, Levim and Yisrael, that are receiving the bracha? Do we have to stand? So al pizaya, it seems to be mashma, you don't have to stand. You could sit and you could have kavana, be meyushiv, I guess pun intended, but meyushiv more than just sitting physically, but you're meyushiv, you're sitting. But the minig, as we know, that the mizbarachim stand. So I saw in a sefer Oyach Neman and Kuf Chav Chesiv Kat Memhei, who writes the following, and he says, since the Kohen is doing an awesome mitzvah when he duchens, how inappropriate. He's doing a mitzvah and you're sitting. If his mitzvah is standing, you have to stand. Als our Mishnah in Bikurim. Everything ends up the Mishnah in Bikurim. But what to me was amazing, his son wrote Hagoyis on the bottom of his father's sefer, and he says, but I don't understand my father. Because when do you stand a mitzvah berabim, bepumbius miuchadais? If there's a big excitement, a big roivam, then you stand. But duchening, what's the excitement? Oh, so you're wondering, what do you mean? When we duchen, it's a ganze yamtiv? The answer is, of course. But this sefer was written in Eretz Yisrael. They duchen every single day, so there's no pumbis. So therefore, for us at least, we could understand the reason, the stand, out, oisei mitzvah. Also, his assumption of pumbius and rabbim is based on the Rambam Shita. As I told you earlier, the Rambam says only Raivam, and we don't go with that Rambam. So this is another good reason to stand up when Yisraelim, Leviyim are receiving the bracha, als our Mishnah in Bikur. I'll give you another example. Many people have a minhag to stand by laning. Now I say that with great respect because many people, choshen people, sit by laning. The Arizal sat, the Vilna Gaon sat. So those that sat are certainly in good company. But for those that stand, what's the reason? So the Mordechai, one of the Rishonim in Shabbos, is recorded as saying that the Ram Rutenberg hayoyimid b'shas kriyas haTorah. Why? So it doesn't say exactly why. We know one of the reasons because it's reenacting Kabbalah's haTorah. But if you look in the Shulti Gebayim, on the bottom of the Mordechai, he's also a Rishon. He said, I know why the Mordechai stood by laning. Because the Yishalmi says, in Bikurim, our Mishnah in Bikurim, When someone's doing a mitzvah, you have to stand up. When someone's laning for a tzibur, what a perfect time to show kavod for mitzvahs. So the reason to stand by laning is our Mishnah and Bikurim. Everything ends up a Mishnah and Bikurim. Oh, maybe Taka we can understand why many people sit. The Mishnah and Bikurim, but since it's a frequent mitzvah, maybe there's no chiyuv. What to me is a mitzvah lefarsim, the Ramami Panu and the Tshuva and Simon Tzadik Aleph, I found others that say the same thing. But the Ramami Panu, Mama spells this out, and he wants to say that really takal halacha, maybe there's no chiyuv to stand by laning. In other words, laning is not itself b'chayiv. But you know why people stand? Because he says that even if you're makel to sit by laning, but you must stand by the aliyah, the baruch hu. Because baruch hu of the aliyah is a davar shebekadusha. So if a person is going to be sitting by laning, he'll end up sitting by baruch hu, and that's unacceptable. So therefore, people stand the whole laning, and shalom al Yisrael. As I state in Ramami Panu, I found others say the same thing. So today, we have made of an hapachu. You see many people that they stand for laning, then gava they sit down, but lemaisa when the aliyah starts, the next aliyah, they are busy schmoozing, Isaac Baver is patim and mitzvah, so they can't stop talking, and they end up sitting by Baruch Hu and jumping up for laning. According to the Ramami Panu, v'nahapachu, better sit by laning, but stand by the Baruch Hu. A beautiful concept of this Mishnah and Bikurim, how we see it's all over. The Marshdam, who was one of the Kadmoinim, one of the earliest Sfadish Gedolim, Yeridea Simon Kuf, he says a story, also a scandal. Someone spoke very critically of a chevra Kedoisha of Goimlei Chasad. He doesn't say what the tumult was, but he says there were people that were very critical of a certain chevra of Goimlei Chasad. And he says the Aveira is unbelievable, the Einish is unbelievable. And he says, did you forget a Mishnah Bikurim? That when someone goes to do a mitzvah, you stand up for him. That's more than covered you show to a Talmud Chacham. Mikanat alamet shechayav bechvoid ha'oisik b'mitzvah yoisem mikvoid talmidei chacham. He's using our Mishnah Bikurim to be mechazik oisei mitzvah. But then he says, listen to this. He says, even though these goimlei chasadim are not doing a mitzvah right now, so maybe right now you could be mavaza them. They're not doing a mitzvah now. Maybe when they do it, he says, no. If someone has dedicated his life, he's ready, on call, 24/7. Miu'adim u'buchanim tamid laseis mitzvah kazais, ef shalayim afil b'shashem b'telam mimenu chayavim b'chvayda. A person that's on call 24/7, that's a goyim lechesed, and you're mechuyev to mechaber him even when he's not actively doing a mitzvah. And that he says, this is pashid, someone that's meyuchid to be oisik in mitzvahs gemilas chasadim. He quotes in Yishalmi in the beginning of Peah, that how chavav it is chesed by the Rebbeinu Shalom v'chesed Hashem mi'olam v'yad olam. Amazing. Somebody that's ready to do a mitzvah of chesed deserves covet even if he's not actually doing a mitzvah. I was thinking, how appropriate this is for the Chevra Hatzalah, 24/7, Purim and Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, 365 days a year. Now, I think if you stand up for a Hatzalah member when he walks into the room, he'll probably call the police. He'll probably call the something, it's like very strange. And I'm not saying dafka yeah or not stand up, but the attitude, it's so precious to be mechabev and oisa mitzvah. There's a tremendous lesson lamaisa we can learn what it means a mitzvah. And unfortunately, people have a certain tendency when someone is a klal person, they're quick to criticize him. Whether it's Hatzalah or other organizations, v'ef shelafartam ki rabim heim. But there's a certain geschmack, quote unquote, to find fault in those that are doing good, because they're in the limelight, But a Yiddish attitude is someone does a mitzvah, 24/7, ready on the call of duty. Is this Mishnah? It's a Mishnah Bikur. The Yam Shloim in Ksubis Perik Beis Simon Hay. He speaks about showing covet to an Isha Tamachachim. Goes to the whole Yisugya. He says, but an Isha balas tzedakah. Roy lechabda ki oimdim mipnei goim lechasadim kemoy mipnei laim de Torah. And he brings our Mishnah, our Yishalmi and Bikurim. Everything ends up this Yishalmi and Bikurim. Respect for mitzvahs. Another example, the Yad Eliyahu, one of the earlier Shalos and Tshuva, Simon Nun Dalet, he writes the following: Nachon lamayt mipnei hamisasek hagoyva, the one that's collecting money, Gabay Tzedakah, you have to stand up in front of him. Why? And he quotes the Gemara in Shabbos, Yichelki migoyvei tzedakah. In other words, when someone is collecting money and he comes into your house or comes into shul, there's a chiyuv to stand up for him. A perfect mashal of our Yishalmi. In fact, Rabbi Bull just told me coming here that he asked Chaim Kanievsky, and this he showed this by the dinner of Irgun Shurei Torah. Do you have to stand up for a Gabay Tzedakah? Chaim says, Avada. This Yishalmi, this Mishnah, he's Aisa Mitzvah. The Pesachei Tshuva and Yeridei Reish Nun Vav Aleph and the Ben Ish Chai and Kisei Tzei Yotes quote this Lalacha. You stand up for a Gabay Tzedakah. Now, some people stand up for a Gabay Tzedakah and they run the other way. That's not what the Yad Eliyahu meant. But definitely, there's a svara to this. Especially Gabay Tzedakah sometimes don't get the most covered. There is a chashash machshil nasad levaya also. So definitely this is the point. Now, what's interesting is what I saw, and to me it showed the Pikchas of Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky. We once spoke about, and this was tape 738 a long time ago. We spoke about which parts of davening you have to stand. So, as Yashir, many people are makbet to stand. By Yevarech David, that we say in davening, some stand, and some say there's no chiyuv. Now, whatever the reason is, we're not going to get into now, but it seems that it's not such a chiyuv like the rest of davening that we definitely stand, like Mitzvos is a chiyuv to stand. So Rabbi Yankov says he has a different cheshbon why we stand by Yevarech David. Because Rabbi Yankov writes, and this is in Emes Yakov and Simon Nun Aleph, that he writes that Nizeru Ma'oi, the Welt was makbet to stand up for someone that was either collecting tzedakah or giving tzedakah. Because this Mishnah Bikurim, since the Paiskim, the Magen Avraham, Mishnah Berurah quote the minig that by Vayivarech David you get up to give tzedakah, so in every shul there was someone going to give tzedakah. So they stood up not for Vayivarech David per se, they stood up for the tzedakah. No, so then it became like, we're standing up for Vayivarech David, but it's not true. The real chiyuv to stand is for the Gabay Tzedakah. Now, Rabbi Yankov stresses the people that are giving tzedakah. I wonder why he didn't say the Gabay goes on a pushka. Maybe he meant to say L'Rabusa, even if there's no Gabay. But if your neighbor in shul gets up to go to the pushka, stand up for him. But it's interesting how that became part of Kallah Yisrael's daily activity. We stand up by Vayivarech David for the collecting of the tzedakah. The Yad Eliyahu himself declares the shaila, do you stand up for a Gabay that gets paid for it? Now that it gets paid for it, it's not such a mitzvah. But I saw the Pirish on the Sefer Chassidim that I mentioned earlier, and also the Minchas Yitzchak Chelik Yud, Siman Pei Vav, both don't understand the suffix. True, a mitzvah, Amanas Shreil Kabel Pras, is a great ischar. But it's still a mitzvah, Amanas Kabel Pras, what's wrong? So Lamaisa, I think we could say that there is a tzad to say, to stand up for a Gabay Tzedakah, but I did see, I guess to defend those that don't stand up, Rav Sternbach in his Chuvas Chayil Dal Reish Yud Ches, he says maybe the heta is that today, Baruch Hashem, there are so many Gabay Tzedakah, so many collectors, it's now a frequent mitzvah, and we rely on that side that only a mitzvah lekitza. But certainly I could tell you, if someone comes into your house collecting, and if you stand up for him, you give him a tremendous chizik that he desperately needs, he's a brachan as it is, and it could be very much our Mishnah in Bikurim as well. Now, one thing I should mention is a different halacha that people confuse. The Ariya Kaddish, and this is quoted by the Magen Avraham and Mishnah Berurah, to stand up when you give tzedakah. Al pisoid, when you give tzedakah, you're supposed to stand. So there are two dinim. When I give tzedakah, home alone, I put money in the pushka, I stand up. I'm not standing up for myself. I'm standing up for the mitzvah of tzedakah. But when someone else gives tzedakah, then we have our Mishnah Bikurim to stand up for Oisei Mitzvah. I was just Baruch Hashem by a bris Friday, and I was able to put this Lamaisa, the Rav in our Mishnah in Bikurim, and Reb Kiva Eiger in the Gilyon on the page in Yeridei Reish Samaches Yivkat Aleph quotes this, that when the Kvata brings the baby into the bris, everybody has to stand up. This is mamish our Mishnah. They're bringing the baby to do a mitzvah. You're not standing up for the baby. You're standing up for the kvata. Now, if the kvata is an Alta Zayda and he's above 60 or 70, he's to stand up for a zaken. But even if he's under that age, there's a mitzvah to stand up for Oisei mitzvah. And the Rabbi and the Mishnah Bikurim gives this example as halacha l'maisa. Now, what's interesting, the Ramah, also Reish Tamachei, says the following: Yesh oimim shekallah yamdu. The whole tzibah has to stand by the entire bris, entire proceedings. Shenema pasuk in the Navi vayamait ha'am bebris. People stood by the bris. No, so it's a beferish Ramah that not just when the kvata comes in, but to remain standing for the entire bris. And unfortunately, people don't know this, but it's a beferish Ramah. Now, it sounds like a beferish pasuk, but if you look up the pasuk, it has nothing to do with bris milah. Bris means a treaty. So the guy in Kedarke writes, it's a chumra ba'alma, and he throws in, now the guy, when you learn Shulchan Aruch and you learn the guy, it's always a treat. He says a few words, but there's so much meaning to it. The guy in here is saying a second makar to stand by the bris, which really the Mordechai that I mentioned earlier says beferish. The Mordechai points out in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, the Gemara says Hamal Oimer Alamila. The Moel makes the brach Alamila. Va'oimdim Sham Oimim Kashem Shenichnas Lebris. So the Mordechai picked up Ha'oimdim Sham. It doesn't say the participants, those that are standing by the bris. Obviously, he's supposed to stand by a bris. So Lamaisa, it seems that this is the Mordechai is in Shabbos Tav Chav Beis. The taka the minig is to stand by a bris. Maybe it's not a chiyah, but definitely that's the minig. I was zeicha to a pidyon haben recently. My Einikel's pidyon haben, and it was interesting. You don't see a pidyon haben too often, but the oilam was standing. That's the way it should be, and only one person was sitting, the kohen. And it was strange to me, manishtana. So the truth is that why does a tzibah stand by the pidyon haben? Says the Maritz and the Imrei Emes and the Lakutim, I saw this in that Sefer Yisrael B'Madam, both say it's a Mishnah Bikur. The levaya ben is going to a mitzvah, you stand up. And it's not stam a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah that's very rare, because not most Kahanim and Leviyim's children, there's no pidyon haben, and if it's a daif and a cave. So the having a pidyon haben is extremely rare. That justifies standing. So that's why the whole tzibah has to stand. Fine. Why does the kohen sit? So taka, there are some that the kohen used to stand. But the minik to sit, that the kohen sits, is based on the Mari Bruna and the Chuvas Kuf Chav Beis, that everybody stands, but the kohen sits proudly. Shenema l'mashcha b'hem. Now he says, that's all he says, l'mashcha b'hem, but if you look inside the Tezvav, l'mashcha is a lashon shrara v'chashivus. The kohen has to show his importance. This is matnas kahuna. This is him redeeming a child. This is his yichus. So it's a display of kvoid hakuna. He has to remain seating, even though everybody else is standing. We mentioned earlier, when they bring the mace to levaya, the Yushalmi says to stand. It's Yushalmi, and that's taka in Shulchan Aruch, Shin Samach Aleph, Hasiv Dalid. And the Taz says, you stand up not for the mace, but for the ones that are doing the mitzvah of levaya sameis. What to me was marvel. The Taz says, but I have a kasha, because the Gemara in Vayikot and Chav Heid says the famous story when they brought the aron of Rav Huna to Kfura in the Ma'ora of Rav Chiyu Banav. So the Gemara says that Rav Chiyu was buried. On one side was his son Yehuda, the other side his son Chizkiah. And the Gemara says Yehuda and Chizkiah, although they were already deceased, communicated, it's not right that we should be sitting, laying, whatever, when Rav Huna is standing, so they also stood up. So the Taz, with the sensitivity to every V'ar Torah, says, so we see that you stand up not just for the kvoid of the Noisia Mita, you stand up for the mace, because they said, let's stand up for Rav Huna. So Nekudas HaKesef says, I don't understand this. I mean, this is out of our range. But if you have Mesim standing up for Mesim, then I could understand. But who said a Chai stand up for a mace? So whether you stand up extra for a Choshva mace, according to the Taz, maybe yes. According to the Nekudas HaKesef, not. But the Taz does say emphatically, from this halacha we learn, you have to stand up when someone's going to do a mitzvah. Not for the mace. We stand up by a levaya when they wheel in the mace, even if it was a simple yid, for the noisei hamit. Another question I would love to hear some clarity about. What you see, my Nichum aveilim. This is really based on the Shulchan Aruch and Shin Pei Zayin Aleph. Ideally, based on the pasuk in Iyov Beis Yud Gimel, the menachem are supposed to be sitting on the ground. As they state in the pasuk in Iyov, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. But Baruch Hashem, the aveilim are moichel, so you're allowed to sit on a chair. But Nichum aveilim is supposed to be done be'ika sitting. And the Hezbis Pashit, if you come into someone and you're standing, that means you have one foot out the door, you're coming, you're going, you hit and run. Sitting shows a hishtatvus of tsar. It's a real noiseba when you sit down. But there's no doubt about it, you look in the Shach and Taz on that mechaba in Shin Pei Zayin, that ideally, Nichum aveilim should be done sitting. And it always was strange to me, why do we see that people deliberately stand up and then say, Amakim in Achem Eschem? Why dafka stand? It's a din in Amida. I mean, when you say Eidos, you have to stand. When you say Menachem and Achem, you have to stand. So when I learned the sugya, I said, I'll probably find a wonderful chiyuv to stand. All I found was Rav Moshe and Chelekei Siman Chav, Sivkot and Chav Aleph. Rav Moshe says that, Bemis, of course, Nichum aveilim is b'yeshiva, but you say this nusach when you're about to leave. So if it's a divrei preda, divrei prisha, say it when you're leaving. So then you're allowed to stand. So not that you're mechuyev to stand, you're allowed to say it when you're standing. No? So, okay. In other words, there's no chiyuv to stand. It's a heter to stand. But maybe it would make more sense to remain seated. So I'm not going to change minik ha'olam, but if someone knows a little more than this, I would love to hear this. Talking about these type of minyanim, one point that we see that Amida is ma'akiv is the Gemara in Vayikot and the Chafam Beis and the Mechab and Shin Mem Sivalev quotes this. Kriyas, rising kriya on a mace is absolutely ma'akiv, has to be done standing. This is based on a pasuk. If someone writes kriya by yeshiva, by sitting, he's not yoitza, even b'di'ev, because the pasuk says that. Moving on to Ebenezer, there is a Knesset Gdolim in Ebenezer Siman Samach Beis. The Berhetiv in Siman Samach Beis quotes it. So it's on the page in Shulchan Aruch. And an earlier source of Tikkun Zoya, that a person, that the oilam is supposed to be standing by the entire chuppah. The Zoya seems to say that the Farish Lamekim Bamida by the chuppah. The Rosh Shlomo Kluger in Elav HaChashloim and Ebenezer Kuf Tezayin says, Asa leisha b'shas ha-brachos u'bevadi roi u'lochish l'dvar of divalikim chayim, to stand the entire chuppah. I saw the Abiyah Oymen Chelik Vav, Siman Ches and Ebenezer, and the Emek Halach up to the Goldstein and Siman Samaches also wonder about the minig that people sit by a chuppah, besides kavod for the chosson. Don't forget chosson Daimul HaMelech. Don't forget the shchina is there by the chuppah. So Eikem Mikamei shchina. But for us, and Taka, it's beautiful. I found this beferish. We can understand why you have to stand by the chuppah. Because of Mishnah Bikur. They're doing a mitzvah, a rare mitzvah. Hopefully you get married just once in a lifetime. So that's why you have to stand. So many are makbid. So Rav Sternberg writes that was the minig in Yerushalayim to stand by a chuppah. Now a lot has been written to try to understand why today in America they set up chairs and people sit. So I saw the Sher Mitzvah Malach and Kuf Mem Zayin Yud Gimel. He says maybe since the chuppah is held on a platform, which is a different reshus than the tzibur, so there's no chiyuv to stand. But many people who know these halachas would dafka a makbid to stand by the chuppah. But what to me was intriguing, what we see today, that taka many people sit, and when the chosson kallah march down to the chuppah, you'll see many people very proudly stand up in kavod for the chosson and kallah. But many people, amongst them Gedolei Yisrael, remain seated. Not they don't realize, they don't dinachap, they defiantly remain seated. So when I began this sugya, this is one of my focuses, I have to figure out what's the pshat, b'meh pligi. So Pashit, you think about it objectively, this is a perfect example of our Mishnah Bikur. The chosson's going to a mitzvah, a chashva mitzvah, a rare mitzvah. Stand up for him. This is a mitzvah l'kitzim. And I found a farish based on this Knesset Gdoila, Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky, and many others said dafka to stand when the chosson and kallah go to the chuppah. They're going to a mitzvah. They're bringing bikurim, you stand up, they're going to a mitzvah. But Rav Moshe, and this I know this personally, Rav Moshe sat by a chuppah. And his sons, Rabbi Chaim, both Rav David and Reuven explained, because in America, it's the minig of reform. You know, it's here comes the bride, and it's more of a goyish minig, or a reform minig, not a minig Yisrael. Now, Lamaisa, I can't say it's chayk akum, because chayk akum is only asa when it's a religious custom. This is just a minig. But what to me was interesting is, I was thinking, because it's a reform minig, so you change the minig of Klal Yisrael? But I thought about it, no one's changing the minig. You have to realize, probably up till 50 years ago, people stood the entire chuppah. Laimi by a chuppah that was outside, so stam you stood. But even indoor chuppah, the minig was, like we said earlier, based on a zoya, based on all the paiskim, to stand by a chuppah. So it wasn't a question of standing up for the chosson kallah. You were standing anyhow. This Mechaber of a Sefer on Kedushin, Nichum Savitz saying, he told me, yes, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, why don't we stand up for the chosson kallah? So Reb Chaim did not understand this question. He says, wer sitzt by a chuppah? You're standing up for the chosson? Like, who's sitting? So if you're not sitting, you don't stand up for the chosson kallah. But Taka, it comes out that today, in Tafshin Ayin Ches, it's Arachiyah. So maybe the answer, like we said, is because it's a miniga of the reform. So this Reb Nachum Savitz told me, which is interesting, that both Reb David and Reb Reuven told him that they Taka did like their father's minig, but over the years they've gotten so many comments. People looked at them like the mom was like, they don't know basics. So how do you not stand up? They started to stand up also, because everybody else does it. But maybe there's got to be more to this. I would love to hear from someone who knows that a little more about this. But Rebelski Taka in his tshuva, and Taka said this first here in Irgun Shir Torah. He said that Taka, that it makes sense to stand up outside chosson and kallah. He says, don't tell me that kallah they're not doing a mitzvah and they're going down to the chuppah, because basically, even though like the famous Ran in the Dharm, she's only passive, but they're still going to an oisei mitzvah, and therefore it makes sense to stand. Those that don't probably have a chesed. Just quickly, the last group of questions, which I hope are very pashit, standing or sitting by birchas HaTorah. We say that mitzvah, the raisa, birchas HaTorah. So the chayra, we would say, why not stand? I stand when I make the bracha on Sfira, and I make the bracha based on other mitzvahs, lulav. But the emphasis now we realize it's not so pashut. A mitzvah that's done sitting, the bracha is also sitting. We saw that from earlier. And Taka, I saw a list of Gedolei Yisrael that dafka sat by birchas HaTorah. Why dafka sit? Why not stand? So this is a pella. Tosfos in brachas and Aleph Beis says when a person benches, he dafka should sit. How do we know? It's a pasuk in the Torah. This is a very rare Tosfos. We would think it's some type of a drushvar. V'achalta v'savata uveirachta. So Tosfos, savata is a conjunction of shev eis. Now is the time to sit. V'achalta shev eis uveirachta. Tosfos says dafka to sit by bench because it's the raisa. And you look in Shulchan Aruch, the Paiskim say, and this is in Kuf Pei Gimel test, the Mechaber says, why do you sit by benching? There's more kavanah when you're sitting. So I was thinking, based on this Tosfos, I understand why dafka to sit by birchas HaTorah. Since there's no chiyuv to stand, and it's a deraisa, it's like benching. Now, in the olden days, when the end of sight, when Mishnah says they used to stand by learning, maybe you have to stand by birchas HaTorah. But today we sit by learning, birchas HaTorah can be said sitting. I did see some Gedolei Yisrael dafka stood al pi Kabbalah. No, al pi Kabbalah, fine. But mahalacha, if there's more kavanah sitting, it's kedai to sit. A regular birchas hanenin, a shakel and a cup of coffee, the Bim Begodim in Psicha Kalelas Yud Ches says, nenin miyushav nam. You're allowed to say a birchas hanenin b'yeshiva. In other words, you're allowed to say it sitting or standing. There's no chiyuv either way. I once had this shayla, someone wanted to show kibbutz to his grandfather, so by regular Shabbos food, he brought the Netilas Yadayim to the table, the shissel and the cup, so Zayda would have to get up and wash. So Zayda washed, sitting down. Afterwards, he felt terrible. What did I do? He was machshel Zayda. He did a mitzvah when he was sitting. So you want to know, is there a problem with making Netilas Yadayim when you're sitting? Rather not. If the Netilas Yadayim is a prelude to the mitzvah of eating, and eating, we do sitting. So why can you make Netilas Yadayim when you sit? Say the Pesach by night, many people bring the Rosh Hashanah Netilas Yadayim to the table. Now I did hear some tzaddikim by a tish dafka stand up when they wash, others dafka sit. But it seems clear there's no Indian to stand by a mitzvah that's done as a haskalah for achila. And last but not least, an interesting question. Someone just asked me this the other day. When they say zimun of Elikenu and Baruch Elikenu, is there a chiyuv to stand or not? So this is not brought in Shulchan Aruch Hagam. People think it's straight from Sinai. But I saw the Buchacha in Kuf Tzadik Beis brings from his Rebbe, Moshe Leib Sasava, that to stand by Nevarach Elikenu, because Eglon Melech Moav, we began with, stood by Dvar Hashem, here Elikenu you have to stand. So l'chayr it's a perfect chiyuv. Why doesn't everybody else do it? Why do people not makpid? So I was thinking it's pashut. Because if the mitzvah is done by yeshiva, since benching is done by yeshiva, and zimun's part of it. But those that do, it's the cover that Eglon showed. I got to talk to you all.
Shem I'd like to thank Rabbi Smith for the wonderful share. Rabbi said today is the first day of Shovavim. Hundreds of thousands of Yidden are participating in Shir Mirdei Chelik Beis all over the world. If you don't have a shir in your shul, please call Ign Shir Torah and we'll arrange you a shir. Please take a luach, a card, to learn your day inside besides going to shiurim. We need your help, Rabbi Said. There's hundreds of thousands of Yidden participating over 600 places around the world. It's a tremendous Kovod Shemayim and Kiddush Hashem. Everybody wants to be part of it. Please be sponsored one of these places of Taras Mishpacha. It's such a Zikr Rab and people, all different languages are coming. Kirev Rechoikim, it's the biggest chus to bring Yiddish kinder closer to the Eibishter. Please write out your checks. We'll give you credit cards now to Ign Shir Torah to sponsor a series of Taras Mishpacha is $1,000. One share is $500. Or give whatever you can. Tis Kremitzes, Rabbi Chanam Lekashem Rosh Kodesh Baruch Lezagis for Alfei Chaver Mitzvah Mitzvah Shnam Adan Rechovas Man Tzidka Yagdel Torah V'Yadi Kaddish. Amen. Machta Sikim in 2 minutes. Also, the Lakewood Shul made an appeal. Lakewood Yeshiva of Kallenstone. Please, everybody, help out that too. Write one check out for Yeshiva Kallenstone Lakewood and one check for Ign Shir Torah Shovavim. In the lab, yeah.
They brought him standing?
No. They brought him in. What's the difference?
No, because they said, what did they say?
Oh, he's there. Yeah.
He's standing. They were sitting.
Rabbi say L'chaim, and Babel's Yutzam, and Tata Tzigishtat L'chaim. Please, think L'chaim. Wenn schon, get the bruches.
Laying is not standing, that's the word.
Get in the mile.
Yeah, but his face was sitting.
Laying, everybody was laying.
Yeah, but
Yeshiva, that's also yeshiva.
No, so what does it mean?
it's not nice. He's standing, we have to be sitting.
It doesn't mean, because
He's resting.
so what does
Kazin and Shabbos.
you can say the more loud, you can shout out.
They were going to inter the body, you know that. They got to be. So there's something new. So they have to show a little bit that, you know, things out of my brain.
Well, the shot needs to say, when Mason could talk and act,
No, there's no
everything
You find that
There you go.
This is different.
Just you have to understand their language.
Right.
I see you sitting learning. I see you doing
It says, but leave it up to you. It's a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. They have to show chavivas. Maybe it says.
I mean, that's just
There, yeah.
that's
I looked and turned and called. I called the square, a beautiful day. I called this from Lakewood. These two things still bother me. And again this morning.
There's davening and the guy comes out and stand up.
I'm talking about the chosson, kallah, and Nichum. Those two things are done by Klal Yisrael.
That's just good to getting up. I think this is getting up.
Why not? So he told me this. He told me the square. But I'll read the Rebbe. They stood up saying, no one asked the Rebbe why.
That's the mitzvah. So we're getting up.
Why dafka stand? Why dafka stand? The square Rebbe.
Say it that way.
No one asked why they did this.
You sit in the back. You sit in the back. You have a well good. Hello.
You sit in the front. You sit in the front.
It became.
Probably right. I like the
I'm sitting in still stay there. And it's time to go.
Kijk, ben ik daar hebben reis voor hebben. Klaar. Het is about time you know that.
The son of the Jew.
They have some kind of yeshiva. Daar zit ze niet.
Son. Jew here, son. You see this rough from the Jew. I always tell them that
No, you can't ask such a question loud. What's the here, one sometimes you stand, sometimes you sit. So you sitting after. No, really.
Yeah, you're good. Haida and a birchas haida is different. That's a shach.
No. My name, I have to stand when you're in the mitzvah. The sake of Shana, and I do a mitzvah, but I have to stand doing
That's what they say. It's totally. It's totally.
That's usually has to be standing
done
always?
standing.
the bird, mitzvah Shana. You have to sit down.
No.
You can sit down.
Yes. This is totally. No. This was page 738. We spoke about Simcha already. 730 we spoke about standing for tefillah. The other klal is the birchas haida is a suffix that you have to stand. You ever notice people about yeshiva? I hold that. There's lightning and thunder, everybody stands up. All over. And they say he's sitting. There's no reason to stand up. There's no reason
I
to
never saw sitting. You're learning.
That's what's telling you. Birchas hashach.
I have some. Rabbi say,
I'll be home in a half hour.
Rabbi said there's no chiyuv to stand for the sikkim, but there was tzaddikim who stood. There was tzaddikim who stood for the sikkim, so elu v'elu could stand if you want, but just they were all quiet by the sikkim.
I was a bucher, and when I came in with my film to shul, he insisted that I go in it before.
Oh yeah.
Older he was already at that time in his 80s.
I've been new shots 50 times.
Yeah, and he insisted that I go in a bucher. So no.
He had ruach hakaitis also. Yankel was ruach hakaitis. Yankel. He said butzim. Okay, ready.
What do you mean? You didn't say by slikas ruach kodshach al tikach limani?
So Yankel's future. Akweinigkeit.
Okay, please find your seats or your standing places. We'll do the sikkim. Sikkim from Rav Smith. Rabbi say?
Talking to the wrong guy with the Ramis. Yankel, hey, you don't start with him. Just a short summary we learned today, Bez Hashem. One thing we definitely saw over and over, we have to show kavod, stand for the Rebbeinu Shlem's Torah, for the Rebbeinu Shlem's mitzvahs. Eglain got an incredible schar for showing, standing up for the Kvayid Hashem. Even Nebuchadnezzar got an incredible reward for taking a step for Kvayid Shemayim. That's certainly an inspiration for us. The kavod that we show for mitzvahs should always be primary in our attitude. But in halacha, it seemed that there is a chiyuv to stand up for Oisei Mitzvah. Beginning with the Mishnah in Bikurim, where the Mishnah says the tremendous parade with music and with kavod atayr, with kehanim, levim coming out to show kavod for those that brought Bikurim, but primarily the Bali Umniyah's workers that worked for others and it involved Bittul Malacha, which is something that is an absolute no-no in Yiddishkeit. But to here, this was an exceptional case where they stood up and they stopped doing Malacha, of course, for a few seconds. But Bali Malacha stopped doing Malacha to show kavod for mitzvahs. Even though you don't stop doing, you don't stand up for a Talmud Chacham als Bittul Malacha. And I should have mentioned, a pile benches a much shorter benching als Bittul Malacha. When it comes to doing kavod, showing kavod to an oisei mitzvah, the Mishnah says there's a chiyuv to stop working and show kavod. The Bavli in Kedushin, Lamed Gimel, in Chulin, Nun Daled, the Yushalmi and Bekurim all certainly reinforce this Mishnah. The Yushalmi shows that you stand up for the one that carries the mace. The Sefer Chasidim, the Rav, Rishonim say applies to all mitzvahs, even Bizman Hazeh, as we saw from the Marik. Adrabah, today we need chizik to show kavod for mitzvahs. Why do you stand up for a mitzvah? Pashat chavivas ha-mitzvah. Also, sometimes there's a chashash that the mitzvah will be neglected. Machshil lasud lavay. We saw the Rishalmi says an infrequent mitzvah. There's a more chiyuv, more of a kavod, and perhaps the person is elevated when he does a mitzvah. He becomes a bal maisa. But definitely, there's a chiyuv to stand up in the middle of work, even in the middle of learning, as we said, because chashivas ha-mitzvah is very important. Pashtus, the oisei mitzvah cannot be moichel because the kavod is not for the oisei mitzvah. The kavod is for the mitzvah. We did see a few reasons why we don't stand up for someone that's going to put on talis and tefillin or dalad minim or saying krishma, but that's certainly not done. But what should be done is what we find in the Paiskin. When someone says kedu, a davar shebekadusha, baruch hu kaddish yishmei rabbah, Aliyah, Baruch Hu, one should stand according to the minig of Ashkenazim, even if you sit by laning, but to stand by the Baruch Hu of the Aliyah is important. We don't sit next to someone's davening Shvain Esra, according to some, because of this Mishnah and Bikurim, he's doing a mitzvah. The Kohen stands for duchening, and the Israelim stand als kavod for the Kohen is doing a mitzvah. We said as we stand for an Isaac and Milas Chasadim, again, whether we stand or not for these Gibori Kayach that do mitzvahs 24/7, but the attitude has to be kavod for an oisei mitzvah. We do stand when the Gabbai Tzedakah walks around collecting, and when a collector comes into shul, and you stand up for him, it's a tremendous chizuk. We stand when the baby is brought to the milah, the kvata that comes in with the baby, we stand not for the baby, but for the oisei mitzvah. And of course, the entire milah, the Ramah records the minhag to be standing. By a levaya, the main chiv is not to stand necessarily for the mace, who was a Talmud Chacham, but for the noisei mace. Nichum aveilim is dafka b'yeshiva, and when we're leaving, as a sort of a saying goodbye, we stand up and we say Amakom Menachem Eschem, even though there's no chiyuv to do that. Someone pointed out, which is probably true, since sometimes there are many menachmim, and you can't yell out from where you're sitting, so you stand up and you go close to the mace, and then we say Amakom Menachem, so maybe it became practical to stand up and go next to the mace and say Amakom Menachem, next to the menachmim, next to the aveilim, and say Amakom Menachem. Kriya is ma'akiv, standing is based on a pasuk. It seems la halacha one should stand by the chuppah, and we hope we could sanction the minhag of those that sit by the chuppah. But again, it seems that there's a strong reason to stand when chosson and kallah go down to the chuppah. And again, hopefully we could sanction the minhag of those that don't stand. Birchas HaTorah can be said either sitting or standing, like benching, maybe if there's more kavanah to say a dafka sitting. Birchas Hanenin, you could say sitting or standing. The Tilos Yadayim, both the mitzvah and the brach can be done by yeshiva or by amida. And the zimun of Alekeinu, as we said, even though it seems to be a davar shebekadusha, and that's why people stand by Alekeinu, but it seems that since it's part of benching that's done by yeshiva, and also it's a mitzvah tadira, there's no absolute chiyuv to stand by Baruch Alekeinu.
Yeah, no, look at the abbreviation. Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. Hashem's name.
Right.
Hashem's name. You told us you have to go by Hashem.
Yeah, right.
I'll touch it. I forgot to say the name, but still you got to say it.
That was good.
A couple of years, I got to you forgot that. It's more than enough. You were Chal Chidush, even though you get Meister. Epis have a game. Don't let him go.
I mentioned.
You also bring in the ticket from China.